Hello and welcome or welcome back to the Import Export Hub channel, everybody. It's Bogdan here, your host for the next couple of minutes. Thanks for joining me. I hope you are all doing great, and without begging you to hit those small vanity buttons below this video, allow me to dive into today's topic, in which I will cover the imports and the exports of Qatar, a high-income oil and gas-based Middle Eastern economy. And as usual, for those of you already familiar with my modus operandi, let's say, I will cover the main exports and imports, and afterwards I will take the top 5 chapters from each flow in order to see the main partners and the main drivers. So without anything else to add here, Qatar's exports for 2022 amounted to some $131 billion, which is some 50% more relative to the previous year, so 2021, with mineral fuels and oils driving some 87% of the overall exports, followed by other petrol-related or petrol/energy-intensive industries like fertilizers, plastics, or aluminium, and then continues with inorganic and organic chemicals, so fifth and sixth place in Qatar's overall exports, and the top 10 list ends here with chapter 72, so iron and steel, with some $388 million worth of exports, which is definitely impressive if we look at the figures, but it's only 0.3% in Qatar's overall exports. So guys, you can imagine the scale of the mineral fuels and oils exports. As we can see here, 2022 was Qatar's biggest year in terms of exports, at least if we look at this 2018-2022 time frame. Most probably 2023 will have bigger figures, as the European Union gradually decoupled from the Russian Federation. And if I am looking carefully, except for chapter 89 and chapter 87 also, who both had contractions, the rest of 8 had positive changes. The largest absolute positive change here happening, of course, in relation with chapter 27, so mineral fuels and oils, who saw almost a $40 billion expansion. So guys, these were Qatar's main exports for 2022, and now I will move to the import flow. And as we can see here, the imports are around a quarter relative to the exports. So there is a big positive balance of trade here. There are some $97 billion in 2022. As for the imports, well, it seems that Chapter 84 drove most of Qatar's imports in 2022 with some $5.4 billion. All those petrochemical installations, of course, need upgrades and maintenance, so it makes sense. So this was the chapter, the main import driver. On the second spot, we have here chapter 85 with electrical machinery and equipment with some $2.8 billion, while on the third spot we have chapter 87, vehicles, mostly with some $2.2 billion worth of imports, or some 6.6% share in Qatar's overall imports. And the top 10 list ends with chapter 99 here, so commodities not elsewhere specified, with some $930 million worth of imports. In what concerns the year-on-year changes, we see that we have a 19% positive change, some $5.5 billion. If I were to put a dollar figure to this percentage, with only one chapter, so precious metals having registered a 10.5% contraction. So very briefly, guys, these were Qatar's main imports, and now I will take the top 5 from each flow in order to see the main drivers and partners. And as I was saying earlier, I will begin with the performer from the export flow. So chapter 27, where China took the first spot in 2022 with some $19.8 billion worth of imports. It was followed by South Korea, and on the third spot we see here India with some $13.7 billion worth of imports. And the list continues with other important partners like the United Kingdom or Belgium and ends with Pakistan, who managed to import some $3.7 billion worth of products from this particular chapter. In terms of year-on-year dynamics, the overall figure is positive, with all the top 10 partners registering impressive figures, both in absolute and relative terms, with China and Belgium alone contributing with some $7 billion each. And as I've said previously, it's worth following up how the 2023 exports from this chapter performed, given the EU policy of decoupling from the Russian oil and gas. As for the main drivers, petroleum gas, so heading to 711, drove most of the exports both towards India and the United Kingdom. Moving now, guys, to Qatar's second export driver, we have here chapter 31, fertilizers, which is an energy-intensive industry where Qatar has a big absolute advantage, and basically in 2022 the exports from this chapter amounted to some $3.6 billion, with Singapore, the United States and Bangladesh as the main partners. It goes on with Australia or Thailand, and the top 10 list ends here with the Philippines with some $63 million worth of exports. On a year-on-year basis, the exports went up with almost $1.2 billion, even though we have here the United States, Thailand, and also India who had contractions, but clearly these were offset by the big figures coming from the trading houses in Singapore or the national buyer in Bangladesh. As for the main drivers, well, it seems that heading 3102 drove most of the exports both towards Singapore and Bangladesh. So guys, we're talking about mineral or chemical nitrogenous fertilizers. Moving now, guys, to Qatar's third export driver, we have here chapter 39. So we are talking about plastics and articles thereof, which is a petrochemical related industry. So naturally, again, Qatar has a big absolute advantage here too. And we see that China, India, and also Italy were Qatar's main export destinations for 2022, which were followed by other important ones like, I don't know, France or Pakistan, and ends with Thailand, who in 2022 managed to import from Qatar some $98 million worth of products from this chapter. If we see a 2.85% compound annual growth rate between 2018 and 2022, on a year-on-year basis, things are a little bit more volatile, more dynamic, and we have some 7% more exports relative to the previous year, so 2022, with good absolute positive figures coming from China, India, and Vietnam also, who offset the negative figures coming from Pakistan or Thailand. As for the main drivers, well, we have heading 3901, so polymers of ethylene in primary forms towards China, and polymers of vinyl chloride, again in primary forms towards France. So we are talking about heading 3904. Jumping now, guys, to Qatar's fourth export driver. Yes, we have here chapter 76, aluminium and articles thereof, which again is an energy intensive industry. And as we can see together here in 2022, Qatar's exports from this chapter amounted to some $2.1 billion, with the United States, Turkey, and South Korea as the main destinations, which were followed by other important trading partners like Japan or Thailand, and the top 10 list ends with Indonesia here, who managed to import from Qatar some $44.8 million worth of goods from this particular chapter. Now, in what concerns the year-on-year changes, we see some 28% positive change overall, some $461 million in absolute terms, with the United States having registered the largest absolute positive change of $200 million, while on the other side of the spectrum, if you want, we have Australia, who had a contraction of $12 million, more or less, but clearly not enough to offset the overall positive change. As for the main drivers, well, we see that aluminium wire drove most of the exports towards the United States, while towards Thailand we have aluminium powder and flakes, so we are talking about the heading 7603. And guys, with this chapter being also covered, I will now move to the last one from the export flow, and we have here chapter 28 with some $1.4 billion worth of exports in 2022, some $527 million more relative to the previous year, with the United Arab Emirates, France, and the US as Qatar's main destinations, which were followed in this top 10 list by others like Japan or Brazil, and ends here with Malaysia, who managed to import from Qatar some $13 million worth of goods from this chapter. For this chapter also, it seems that 2022 was Qatar's largest year, the top performer in terms of exported value, with an impressive $288 million absolute positive change happening in relation with the United Arab Emirates, who basically surpassed traditional top three partners like France, the United States, or India. As for the main drivers, well, it seems that ammonia, so heading 2814, drove most of Qatar's exports to the United Arab Emirates, while towards Japan we have here heading 2804. So we are talking about hydrogen, rare gases, and other non-metals. And guys, with the export flow being covered, I will now move to the other side. So the import one, with chapter 85 here, has the main driver in Qatar's imports. And we see here that in 2022, the overall imports amounted to $5.44 billion, with the United States, China, and the UK as the main partners, followed in this top 10 list by others like, I don't know, Germany or Japan, and ends here with Turkey, who basically managed to export towards Qatar some $94.6 million worth of goods. If we look at the compound annual growth rate again for the last 5 years, we see a positive 1.8%, while on a year-on-year basis, things are a little bit more dynamic, and we have a 10% positive change relative to 2021, with good figures in relation with the United States. Most probably we're talking about jet engines provided by General Electric, while on the other side of the spectrum, we see that UK's exports shrunk with some 32%, or $222 million, which is quite important, and most probably we're talking also about jet engines for the Airbus planes, so the famous Rolls-Royce engines. As for the main drivers for both the United States and Italy, we have the same heading, so 8411. Moving now to Qatar's second import driver, again for 2022, we have here chapter 85, so electrical machinery and equipment, with some $2.8 billion worth of imports, with China, the United States, and Vietnam as the top three partners, which were followed by others like Germany or India, and the top 10 list ends with Oman here, who managed an impressive $69 million worth of exports. In what concerns the year-on-year changes, we see a positive 7% change, or some $189 million, give or take. If I were to put a dollar figure to this percentage, with good absolute positive figures concerning both China and Vietnam, both above the $33 million mark. While on the negative side, we have here Italy, who saw its exports shrunk with $19 million. As for the main drivers, well, it seems that from China we have smartphones, what else really? So heading 8517, while from Turkey we have electrical transformers, so we are talking about heading 8504. Moving now to Qatar's third largest import driver, we have here chapter 87. So we're talking about vehicles, basically with somewhat $2.2 billion worth of imports for 2022, which is 16% more relative to 2021, with China, the United States, and Japan as the main partners, which were followed by others like, I don't know, Italy or Austria, and ends here with Slovakia. Looking at the compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years, China and Italy had the largest increases, and the same holds true on a year-on-year basis, as China basically had an absolute positive change of roughly $125 million, while Italy had some $71 million, which, if you ask me, is really impressive for both countries. On the other hand, Japan and the United Kingdom had the largest absolute negative changes in 2022, when we had some $69 million for the former and $32 million for the latter, which, if you ask me, should raise some concerns. As for the main drivers, well, it seems that vehicles for the transport of less than 10 persons drove most of Qatar's imports from Japan, while from Austria we have here heading 8705. So we are talking about special purpose vehicles like concrete mixers, road sweepers, or crane lorries. Jumping now, guys, to Qatar's fourth import driver, we have here chapter 93. So we are talking about arms and ammunition, with some $1.9 billion worth of imports, with the United States, logically, Norway and Turkey as the main partners, which were followed by others like China or Italy, and the top 10 list ends here with France, who managed to export some $10 million worth of goods, let's say, from this chapter. I didn't expect it to see the pacifist and the neutral Norway here, but anyways, moving to the year-on-year changes, we see an impressive $1.5 billion absolute positive change, with the United States and Norway emerging as leaders in terms of absolute value, while Germany managed a negative performance as their exports shrunk with some $16 million. As for the main drivers, guys, I won't read the description here in order to not be red flagged by YouTube. And basically from Norway we have heading 9303, while from South Africa we have heading 9306. And also South Africa is another country which I wouldn't have expected to be such a big exporter of arms and ammunitions. Anyways, jumping now to the fifth and last chapter from the import flow. Bear with me for a little bit more, guys. As we have here chapter 73, so we're talking about articles of iron and steel, with some $1.3 billion worth of imports in 2022, with China here, Germany, and Japan as the main partners, which were followed in this top 10 list by others like India or the United States, and ends with Oman. Sorry. So I was saying that it ends with Oman, who managed to export some $37 million worth of goods. In what concerns the compound annual growth rate, we see a negative 1.4% change, with China quite stable given the values involved, while Germany, another traditional partner for Qatar, had a negative 10% change. But if I drill down on a year-on-year basis, things are positive for almost all of the top 10 partners, except for India and Turkey, Turkey, who both had contractions, some $15.5 million for the former and some $20 million for the latter, while on the positive side, both China and South Korea registered similar absolute positive changes in the range of $65 million. As for the main drivers, well, it seems that from Germany we have heading 7305. So we are talking about tubes and pipes with a circular cross section and an external diameter larger than 40 centimeters, while from Oman we have heading 7603. So we are talking about tubes and pipes again and hollow profiles. And guys, with this final chapter being covered as well, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you've liked it. Don't forget to hit whatever button you like below this video. And as usual, until next time, keep your business safe. Thanks.